When we examine the trajectory of modern hip-hop superstardom, we usually analyze it through the cold, rational lens of commercial metrics. We talk about Billboard charting weeks, streaming algorithms, viral TikTok dances, and the brutal mathematics of touring revenue. It is a business of hyper-visibility, enforced by public perception. But occasionally a figure emerges whose career entirely shatters this superficial paradigm. A figure who forces us to look away from the charts and stare directly into the deep, unresolved abyss of human psychology and generational trauma, on top of grief. In the late 2010s and early 2020s, the music industry witnessed the explosive rise of Jonathan Kirk, known professionally to the world as DaBaby. The media immediately branded him with sensational monolithic labels. He was the unstoppable hitmaker, the viral meme machine, and the unapologetic enforcer of Southern trap. But these sensationalized narratives completely obscure the underlying psychological mechanics of what actually happened behind the curtain. They blind us to the sociological reality of how a sudden monumental influx of global wealth collides violently with unhealed family tragedy. Today we are analyzing Jonathan Kirk. He is a multi-platinum artist, a technical powerhouse, and a figure deeply entangled in public controversy. But to reduce him merely to his headlines or his memes is to miss the deeply compelling, tragic human case study buried beneath the persona. Kirk was a master architect of a specific brand: absolute, unshakable invincibility. He recognized that the modern hip-hop market, particularly the aggressive subgenre of Southern trap, demands an unwavering level of hardness. It rewards a persona that is entirely bulletproof, untouchable, and emotionally impenetrable. Kirk weaponized that demand, crafting an image of a fearless warrior who would defend his brand and his life at all costs. He offered his audience the ultimate escapist commodity, the illusion of a man who could not be broken by the world. But as his commercial power peaked, the reality behind his ascent was overshadowed by back-to-back family tragedies that threatened to dismantle both his psychological stability and his commercial standing. Central to this narrative is the death of his older brother, Glenn Johnson. It was an event that acted as a violent catalyst, forcing Kirk to confront the stark limitations of his millions and the ultimate fragility of the tough guy mask he had so meticulously constructed. To understand the turning point where the illusion began to fracture, we have to look closely at a specific date, November 3rd, 2020. On this day, the entire United States was locked in a state of hyper-anxiety, hyper-focused on the unfolding results of the tense presidential election. But while the world looked toward Washington, a quiet, intimate, and profoundly devastating event was occurring in northeastern Charlotte, North Carolina. At approximately 1:39 p.m., the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department was dispatched to a nondescript parking lot on Berkeley Place Drive, situated just off of Mallard Creek Church Road. Officers arrived on the scene to find 34-year-old Glenn Johnson, the older brother of the world's most trending rapper, suffering from a fatal gunshot wound. Although emergency personnel rushed him to a nearby hospital, he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. It was a sudden, violent loss that immediately sent shockwaves through the hip-hop community and tore the fabric of the Kirk family. The investigation into Johnson's death moved swiftly, but the details that emerged painted a picture far more complex than a standard street altercation. While initial public reports classified it generally as a death investigation, the presence of a self-inflicted gunshot wound eventually led authorities to officially classify the incident as a suicide. What made this tragedy uniquely modern and uniquely haunting was the digital footprint Johnson left behind in his final moments on Earth. Shortly before the shooting, Johnson uploaded a video to social media from inside his car. The footage was not a polished statement. It was a raw, unedited, agonizing glimpse into a state of acute emotional distress. Johnson was seen crying, visibly distraught, while holding a firearm. He made several frantic statements about his mental state and his perception of his interpersonal relationships, claiming explicitly that he had been wronged and done wrong a multitude of times in his past. It was a sentiment that suggested a deep-seated feeling of betrayal, isolation, and abandonment that no amount of proxy fame could cure. The profound tragedy of Johnson's death was compounded by its timing. At that exact moment in history, his younger brother, DaBaby, was enjoying the absolute zenith of his commercial power. His hit single Rockstar had dominated the Billboard Top 100 for much of the summer of 2020, blaring from car speakers and radios worldwide. This jarring juxtaposition, the brother of a newly minted multimillionaire feeling completely done wrong, isolated and struggling to find a singular reason to live, underscores the incredibly complex, often toxic dynamics of wealth, obligation, and family within the hip-hop ecosystem. Glenn Johnson, who was survived by 3 daughters and a son, represented the invisible struggle that so often exists in the dark shadow of extreme celebrity. The immediate public reaction from Jonathan Kirk was a fragile mixture of silence and deeply symbolic gestures. He did not issue a standard sanitized PR statement. Instead, he updated his Instagram bio to read simply, "Long live my brother," and shared a poignant, heartbreaking snippet from his 2019 song Intro, which was the lead track of his Kirk album. The specific lyrics he chose to highlight on his platform were prophetic. "My brother be thinking that we don't love him and let him struggle like we ain't family. Like I won't give up all I got to see you happy." This public acknowledgement was profoundly significant because it proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Glenn's struggle was not a secret kept hidden away in the dark. Kirk had addressed his brother's silent suffering on a global platform over an entire year before the suicide occurred. Yet the outcome remained tragically unchangeable. This realization that even total transparency, global art, and the literal promise of giving up all I got could not save a loved one from the grip of depression became the heavy bedrock of survivor's guilt that would define his next creative project. When we examine the usage of the 2019 track Intro as a memorial in 2020, it uncovers a recurring, agonizing theme in Kirk's life: the cyclical, unrelenting nature of his grief. The Kirk album itself was originally conceived as a tribute to his father, John Kirk, who died suddenly and unexpectedly, just as DaBaby's career was exploding into the mainstream in early 2019. In Intro, Kirk was already attempting to navigate the bizarre, disorienting paradox of being a rising star and a grieving son simultaneously. By referencing that exact same song for his brother's death a year later, he effectively linked the 2 massive losses into a single overwhelming, catastrophic narrative of familial collapse. The lyrics heavily suggest that Glenn Johnson felt an intense sense of alienation, perceiving a total lack of support even as his younger brother became a household name. This specific feeling of being left to struggle, despite being in close proximity to unimaginable wealth, is a documented severe psychological stressor for the families of the ultra-successful. The massive disparity between Kirk's public-facing persona of invincibility and his brother's private, quiet despair created an emotional tension that simply could not be resolved by writing a check. In the days immediately following the tragedy, Kirk's social media presence shifted away from braggadocio toward a rare advisory tone, urgently pleading with his followers to check on your people and openly acknowledge that someone who looks completely straight on the outside might be actively fighting a losing battle for their life on the inside. On November 20th, 2020, just 17 days after the death of Glenn Johnson, DaBaby released a 7-track tribute EP titled My Brother's Keeper, Long Live G. To view this release merely as a commercial endeavor or a quick streaming play is to fundamentally misunderstand its nature. This project was an artistic autopsy of grieving. The EP serves as a raw, completely unfiltered sonic response to suicide, survival, and the immense suffocating frustration of having millions of dollars sitting in a bank account, but possessing absolutely no way to pay for a life that has already been lost. Unlike his previously commercially successful works, which were defined by high-energy bravado, rapid club-ready beats, and comedic videos, this project leaned heavily into somber, stripped-back production and deeply reflective, often distressed vocal delivery. The curation of the EP's guest features was deliberate and highly intentional. The product featured an array of artists known specifically for creating what the culture terms pain music: Meek Mill, No Cap, Polo G, and Tusi. These are not just standard chart-topping rappers, these are artists who have built their entire career on narrating the visceral trauma of the streets, the heavy toll of survival, and the psychological costs of climbing to the top of the food chain. By surrounding himself with these specific peers, Kirk was able to anchor his deeply personal, insular grief within a much broader, urgent cultural conversation about mental health within the black community and the hip-hop industry at large. He wasn't just standing alone in his mourning, he was building a sanctuary of shared trauma, inviting artists who understood the unique weight of carrying an entire community on their backs while trying to survive their own minds. Let's perform a lyrical deep dive into the text of My Brother's Keeper to understand the psychological prison Kirk was operating within. The title track, Brother's Keeper, stands as the most direct, agonizing confrontation with the suicide itself. On this track, Kirk completely strips away his armor, offering a level of vulnerability that was entirely unprecedented in his career. He raps, "Feel like a prisoner in my mind, no one to talk to." Think about that line for a moment. It is a direct, violent subversion of his entire commercial identity. In his typical hit records, DaBaby is the jailer, the enforcer, the one holding the power and controlling the room. Here, he openly admits to being an utterly helpless victim of his own unchecked thoughts. He follows the admission with a chilling warning that serves as the thesis statement for the entire project. Never let depression go unchecked, that shit will cost you. This lyric acts as a tragic public service announcement born directly from what he perceived as a personal, catastrophic failure to intervene before it was too late. In the track 8 Figures, which features a heavy verse from Meek Mill, the conceptual analysis turns sharply towards the complete futility of material wealth. The title itself refers directly to the millions of dollars Kirk has accumulated by late 2020, yet the verses wrestle frantically with the frustration of knowing that his 8 figures could not buy a physiological or psychological solution to his brother's internal darkness. He openly wrestles with the bitter done wrong sentiment that Glenn had expressed in his final video, painfully questioning his own role as a provider and protector. This song illustrates what can be described as the lottery winner's curse in hip-hop, the crushing structural responsibility of having the financial means to help everyone you love, but possessing zero capability to fix the chemical, deep-rooted mechanisms of clinical depression. Gucci Peacoat serves as the emotional beating heart of the entire EP. It addresses the heavy societal stigma associated with mental illness and the desperate importance of treating anxiety. The track is structurally notable for including a raw, candid snippet of a real phone conversation between Jonathan and Glenn. This audio inclusion is vital because it humanizes Glenn beyond the flat headlines of his tragedy, forcing the listener to hear the living voice of the man who felt he was being let struggle. The song's title itself, A Gucci Peacoat, functions as a brilliant, heartbreaking metaphor for the incredibly expensive, flashy masks that successful rappers wear to cover up the freezing cold reality of their internal lives. Finally, the song Shania provides a terrifyingly visceral look at the immediate aftermath of the suicide. Dedicated entirely to his young niece, the song acknowledges the horrific, unvarnished reality of what she witnessed, potentially the physical scene of the suicide itself. Kirk raps with a heavy heart, "I know it ain't easy to see what you've seen, and I hate that you saw it." This specific, explicit mention of the visual trauma experienced by the children left behind elevates the entire EP from a standard personal venting session into a historical document of multi-generational familial destruction. It highlights the devastating ripple effect of suicide, where one's desperate exit creates a lifetime of inescapable trauma for those who remain in the wake. To fully comprehend Jonathan Kirk's turbulent career post-2020, we must critically analyze the intense, unnatural pressure placed on a rap artist to maintain an unbreakable, hyper-masculine, tough guy persona at all times. This specific persona was not just a creative choice, it was the foundational cornerstone of his entire commercial empire, built squarely on his real-world reputation for aggressively defending himself and his brand. However, this exact mask became a psychological cage following his back-to-back tragedies. Industry analysis suggests that the mainstream hip-hop market, and the specific subgenre of Southern trap, demands a level of performative hardness that is fundamentally incompatible with the slow, vulnerable, long-term processing of deep grief. In his public statements, Kirk attempted to clumsily balance these two conflicting worlds. On November 5, 2020, just 2 days after his brother's passing, he tweeted a statement that perfectly illustrates this tension. "Death don't faze me at all. Watching my family suffer does." This is a textbook example of hypermasculine deflection. By boldly claiming that death itself does not faze him, he desperately preserves the necessary image of the fearless, untouchable warrior, even while simultaneously admitting that the immense suffering of his mother and nieces is pushing him to his absolute breaking point. Psychologists frequently call this leakage, where deeply suppressed emotions, grief, and trauma begin to manifest organically in entirely unrelated, volatile areas of a person's life. For Jonathan Kirk, completely unchecked, unprocessed grief of 2019 and 2020 began to leak heavily into his public conduct, his professional relationships, and his mounting legal troubles. Before 2020, his legal issues were largely viewed by the public as a natural, almost justifiable byproduct of his rapid rise, such as the famous Walmart self-defense case. Post-2020, however, his public conduct took on a noticeably more volatile, erratic, and highly impulsive quality. The intense, non-stop pressure to be strong for his surviving family, coupled with the immense breadwinner stress of maintaining a multi-million-dollar corporate music apparatus, created an environment where Kirk would literally be able not to afford to be vulnerable for more than the duration of a brief 20-minute EP. This total emotional suppression directly contributed to an increasingly combative, defensive relationship with the media, the public, and his fellow artists. The hypermasculine mask, which was originally intended to protect his lucrative brand, actually began to completely isolate him from his peers. His fleeting tweet from November 5th, "I'm about to get a therapist, my damn self," stands as a rare haunting acknowledgement that the internal pressure was reaching a dangerous critical mass. The high-profile 2021 bowling alley violent altercation involving the brother of his child's mother, Danny Lee, is frequently cited by culture critics as a primary example of this heightened, unprovoked aggression. The public altercation suggests a drastically lower threshold for conflict, which is a classic documented symptom of unresolved PTSD and complex grief. When your tough guy brand is your primary source of income, you are heavily incentivized to react to every single perceived slight with overwhelming destructive force, even when those slights are occurring in the very midst of a severe mental health crisis within your household. The infamous 2021 Rolling Loud Miami controversy, while almost universally analyzed by mainstream media through the narrow lens of political correctness, corporate PR, and cancel culture, can also be viewed through a deeper lens as a glaring psychological symptom of a rapidly collapsing invincibility myth. Facing a brutal year of extreme consecutive personal losses and the sheer physical exhaustion of maintaining a relentless global touring schedule, Kirk's hyper-aggressive, deeply defensive stance on that stage was that of a man who felt completely under siege from all sides. The strict demands of the hyper-masculine mask required him to double down on a hard, unyielding image in front of tens of thousands of people, leading directly to onstage comments regarding HIV and the LGBTQ+ community that were widely, understandably, condemned as homophobic, harmful, and deeply insensitive. This rigid defensive posture was a desperate, unconscious attempt to reassert total dominance and control in a world where he had recently lost all control over his family's physical safety and mental health. The swift, crushing industry response, a massive wave of high-profile festival cancellations and corporate distancing, further reinforced the rapper's internal feeling of being profoundly misunderstood or unfairly targeted by the world. Ironically, this feeling of persecution closely mirrored the exact sentiments of being done wrong that his brother Glenn had frantically expressed in his final video before ending his life. The ultimate paradox of DaBaby's career is that in trying to maintain an invincible mask to honor his family, he nearly destroyed the very commercial career that made his financial support possible in the first place. Amidst the endless sea of internet memes, repetitive jokes, and controversial headlines, DaBaby's pure, raw rapping mechanics have frequently been completely overlooked or dismissed by music critics. An objective technical analysis of his discography, particularly during the dense grieving era of 2020 and early 2021, reveals a technical virtuoso possessing a masterful command of breath control, rapid-fire triplet flows, and a relentless driving cadence that easily rivaled any of his contemporary peers. The DaBaby flow quickly became a widespread internet meme because of his extreme rhythmic consistency, but its underlying technical complexity is often vastly ignored by casual listeners. Kirk utilizes a highly staccato, percussive delivery that demands immense lung capacity and flawless breath control. Unlike many modern trap artists who rely heavily on punch-ins, recording a song one line or phrase at a time to fake continuity, Kirk's verses frequently feature incredibly long, unbroken stretches of complex rhyming that maintain an exceptional high rhythmic density. In formal technical terms, we analyze his dynamics using the concept of rhythmic density. During My Brother's Keeper era, Kirk's rhythmic density remained remarkably high, but his paralanguage, the underlying emotional tone, texture, and grit of his voice, shifted dramatically. On the track Brother's Keeper, his signature flow is noticeably less bouncy and significantly more pushed, as if he is actively trying to outrun the somber haunting piano melodies of the instrumental beat. This creates an intense sense of internal urgency that perfectly mirrors the explicit lyrics about being a helpless prisoner of his mind. The critical praise he received from outlets like Complex and Pitchfork during his rise occasionally highlighted his unique ability to be tough, funny, powerful, and completely in control. During his grieving era, he managed to maintain this rigid technical control while simultaneously introducing profound dynamic shifts into his verses. He would seamlessly throw in a devastating line that completely altered the mood of the track to something somber, such as casual reference to the high number of family funerals he had been forced to attend, before immediately ramping back up into high-energy, competitive rhymes. The definitive thesis that his technical complexity was overshadowed by memes is heavily supported by the viral DaBaby car phenomenon and the endless internet jokes regarding his supposed one flow. These reductionist memes effectively reduced a highly skilled, intentional lyricist into a flat caricature, making it remarkably easy for the general public to completely ignore the genuine artistry, pain, and grief expressed by his 2020 work. His innate ability to slide across heavy 808s, entrancing melodies while maintaining a grimy, menacing rawness is a hallmark of his North Carolina roots, yet it was frequently dismissed as a repetitive gimmick. The technical shift from the bop era to the Brother's Keeper era is fundamentally a process of creative subtraction. In his grieving period, Kirk stripped away the colorful visual and auditory distractions to focus purely on the raw mechanics of the verse. The production on the EP is soft, relying on somber piano chords or acoustic-style instrumentation, which places his vocal performance directly at the forefront. This forced the listener to hear his rapid-fire delivery, not as a club gimmick, but as a sonic expression of acute anxiety. The fact that he could maintain his signature complex mechanics while sounding like a man whose personal world was actively falling apart is a testament to his technical mastery. We've reached the end of the deep dive, and before we sign off, it's time for final thoughts. When we hear a story as raw, complex, and tragic as the trajectory of Jonathan Kirk and the loss of his brother Glenn, the natural human instinct of the internet age is to pick a side. We want to judge. We want to meme. We want to look at the controversies and the cancel culture and distance ourselves entirely from the humanity of the person behind the music. We put celebrities in a neat little box labeled entertainment and tell ourselves that their millions of dollars somehow insulate them from the basic devastating realities of human suffering, grief, and mental health crises. But if you look at the architecture of what happened to DaBaby between 2019 and 2021, the real story isn't about the music industry or the charts. The real story is about the fatal illusion of invincibility. We live in a culture and a hip-hop ecosystem that constantly demands absolute unyielding hardness, especially from black men. We reward the tough guy mask. We stream the music that tells us someone is completely bulletproof and untouchable, unbothered by pain or death. But Jonathan Kirk's life showed us the heavy, unbearable cost of keeping the mask on when your world is crumbling behind the scenes. He built a multi-million-dollar empire on being unbreakable, only to discover when the depression and suicide knock on your family's door, even 8 figures can't buy a way out. The tragedy of Glenn Johnson is a reminder that mental health issues, isolation, and deep emotional despair do not care about Billboard hits. They don't care about luxury cars or platinum plaques. And when we suppress our grief, when we tell the world that death doesn't faze us, just to protect a brand or an image, that trauma doesn't disappear. It leaks. It manifests as aggression. It ruins careers. And it isolates us from the very people who might actually be able to help us heal. We have to start allowing the people around us, and yes, even the larger-than-life figures we look up to, the space to be fragile. We have to realize that asking for help, admitting you're a prisoner of your mind, and putting down the weapon of performative hypermasculinity isn't weakness. It's the only way we survive. Let's make sure we're checking on our people, especially the ones who look the strongest on the outside. Because beneath the most expensive coats and the loudest bravado, there might be someone desperately wishing they could give up everything they own just to see the people they love happy again. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.